Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Redwood Wonk. I'm your co-host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined this week by Talvi Fried. Welcome, Talvi.
Hi, thanks for having me, David.
No problem. I'm glad you're here. We've collaborated before on different projects, and I'm happy to say that I think we have a great rapport. So this should be really, really fun. So our first topic this week is resilient economy. Where do things stand now in the economy, and what will the impact be on the upcoming clash over raising the debt ceiling? So in this instance, this week we've heard a bunch of economic news. For example, that the unemployment rate is relatively low. I think it was 3.4%, and the inflation rate is moderate. It's down slightly, downward trend, although there's a 1 month blip. This is all relatively moderate and somewhat contradictory in the sense that a lot of people are expecting a recession to pan out, but it looks like the economy overall is not going to have this drastic crash, at least not yet. So in that, we'll talk more about those details, but under this context, we recently just had the State of the Union address where President Biden speaking to, I guess, to the Republicans in the crowd, in the room, he said, quote, "Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it." So that's him kind of giving that salvo of, we're not going to like play this game of chicken in hypotheticals. We're going to do what we do, put the budget out there, and where we want to find out what it is your priorities really are. And the reason I thought this was a good time for us to start this conversation is because some of the members of the House, GOP members have put forward a couple of their talking points to try to like build that momentum and start that campaign, that kind of whisper campaign about what their budget priorities look like. And so, for example, Speaker McCarthy is on the record of saying he's supporting limits to discretionary spending. So this is one example. He agreed to work towards a balanced budget over some finite period. I think the placeholder concept is 10 years. And this was, as folks probably remember, this was in order for him to become the speaker, he had to negotiate with some fringe candidates, a little bit more conservative than the others, particularly fiscally. And so, in addition to that, many of Republicans are looking to basically to non-defense programs as the key way to trim expenditures. So like they want to like cap spending. That's one of the things that they're looking to do. It plays well with their base. It's consistent with, like, for example, the Republican study group is the formal name of the group that's put forward some budget ideas. Before we get into too many of their specifics, that's kind of the lay of the land. So Talvi, do you have any feedback at all on what the sort of the GOP first salvo looks like, and the overall context of the upcoming negotiations and the overall state of the economy?
I mean, where were they 6 years ago saying put a cap on the deficit or on the budgets and talking about discretionary spending? We're kind of recouping now, or trying to recoup from the terms before Biden entered and a whole new cabinet entered and a whole new group of people came in. So I'm kind of like interesting that they're saying that, but there are, because McConnell has been around for a long time. He's not going anywhere. Doesn't matter if Democrats don't like him, he's going to be there again and again. He's not an unintelligent person. Though that he's stepping up now, why wasn't he stepping up when Republicans were in power or had more power to deal with funding and expenditures? So that's just a comment on that, though.
Mm-hmm.
And now putting, what are we putting a cap on? Like discretionary spending. What does that mean? Healthcare? Does that mean education programs? Like, where are they going to suddenly come? Like, what are they going to ask for? Because one thing that happens during Democratic years is there are a lot of more negotiations happening in the House, and especially with budgets. There's just a lot more back and forth, compromise. Though everybody in there, doesn't matter what politics they follow, they all are under the hands of the lobbyists anyway. So why not? Let's just tap that. Let's tax them. Because I feel like there's this trickle down thing still happening, and it's not trickling down. And when you say that the economy is rising and that the job rates are low, yeah, I have 5 of those jobs. Literally, I'm still pretty broke all the time. And I think a lot of other people out there in the United States, we're talking about places like, we're lucky in California. We have a minimum wage of now $15 for companies over 35 people or employees. Lots of other states have $4, but they still have to pay. Sure, they get $2 gas, but they can't get fresh fruits and vegetables without paying $7 a pound for tomatoes, and not even heirloom tomatoes, really dry ones that are kind of gross. But that's what I'm saying is they make so little that they can't really give back to the economy overall. We're lucky in California because we get paid a little more. We also have subsidies. It's the biggest economy in the United States. We're paying for everybody else. And so I don't think this should be an issue with, like, I think there should be all our representatives from California being like, I get that you guys want to put caps on money, but the money's mostly coming from California. So let's get the California vibe going, which is pretty much healthcare and education, which I think would improve the economy a ton. I think it would actually, I'd rather people have, like a house with 2 people and a teenager. They might all have jobs. Great, but they're all making minimum wage. Why can't just the parents work while the kid focuses on their education? So that's, yeah.
Yeah. So you can take this in a few different directions, but I think at least a couple of the things that you mentioned, I think are kind of worth exploring before I go back to some of the GOP ideas, which would clarify, because you're saying, well, what are they talking about cutting, right? So but before I get there, I want to mention, I think you're right on with the comment that you said about, unemployment is low and 500,000 plus new jobs were created. But if, that's the headline number, that's part of the Fed responds to that. And there's like this sort of a drumbeat in the media about, see, the economy's doing pretty good. But when you look under that just one number, for example, you see, number one, a lot of that is seasonally adjusted. We had a warm period, warmer than average winter so far, and that can affect that. It also affects the total sales numbers, but also the fact that if you look at sort of part-time jobs versus full-time jobs, there is a little bit of a split there too, where, if we're creating a bunch of part-time jobs and it's primarily in, service sector, hotel, restaurant, that kind of thing, versus, jobs that meet
construction.
Yeah, things that would show that there's an improvement in manufacturing outlook, construction, other areas where those jobs might be more well-paying, for sure. But then again, the Fed is trying to reduce payroll so that we spend less. So it's kind of this tightrope act. But the data is obviously complicated, and where people, it is a tale of 2 cities when there are folks that are really feeling the pain of sort of our path towards. The inflationary cost increases for everybody, and our path towards a recession. We'll get to that at the end of this segment, whether it's soft landing versus recession and what that might mean for the president and other folks. But I wanted to pivot now back to what you had said about what do they want to cut. So this says, like, well, rather than increase what you had said, like education and health spending and improve people's lives, more targeted benefits, so to speak, if we could say that the federal government is going to do that. I did see one Republican congressman over the weekend say the government's not here to solve people's problems, and so you get this like tone of where they're coming from. So, for example, work requirements. One of the things that I think Matt Gaetz put out, and he told a outlet called Semaphore, that he's begun to socialize a pitch to the other Republicans that involves work requirements for Medicaid and food stamps. So basically, they're saying this social safety net would be there would be some degree of testing, some degree of analysis of how they could deny people these coverages, and that just shows like a relative lack of understanding of how these programs work. Once you qualify for Medicaid, once you qualify for food stamps, it shows that your income isn't sufficient to support a family, and that many, if not most of those people actually work. So it's really it's a political what farce. I don't mean it's not exactly a farce, but it's one of those things where it's like preaching to their constituents. And so, but in support of that, I saw Representative Bacon from Nebraska, who's considered a moderate actually. He said, I think generally able-bodied people that don't have small kids and meet all the criteria should be seeking work. And I think, again, this is just sort of one of those things that gets taxpayers agitated as opposed to actually being a problem solver. But they're calling these structural reforms. So I just want to call that out, that like they do think they could cut some significant amount of money to food stamps and to Medicaid and some of the other social safety net programs. But the truth is that the Senate it's a non-starter in the Senate. So because it's Democratic majority there. So realistically, this is I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's some degree of political theater. And I'll mention these other two things, and then you could comment on all three, because that's the nature of the things that they've been proposing. The other one is COVID funds clawback. So what they're saying is that so much money was sent to the states that is still unspent, that they want to figure out a way to pull that money back. And in fact, even Representative Cole from Oklahoma on the Rules Committee, which is a powerful committee, he had said that ought to be on the table and could fit whatever legislative deal Republicans hope to strike with Democrats. So again, they're saying things that they think people want to hear. And then finally, this other one, I'll wrap up here and hand over to you. This concept that Biden talked about during the debate, during the State of the Union address, he said, quote, some Republicans want Social Security and Medicare to sunset. And he was basically pointing to Senator Rick Scott's plan for the last midterm election that ended in November, saying after 5 years, his plan was that after 5 years, all laws would sunset. And he says, the president said, in my plan, Senator Scott in response said, in my plan, I suggested the following: all federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. If a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. So that's absolutely tone deaf, because he was really panned and ridiculed. And in fact, the whole uproar of Congress members in the State of the Union address, they were saying, no, we're not cutting it. No, we're not cutting it. And there's been this sort of tacit agreement that they're not going to cut Social Security and Medicare, but there are, practical, pragmatic, rational reasons to tweak it, which means to adequately fund it. So now we know the areas they think they're going to save money. That means that the 800 or 900 billion in military is mostly off the table. Social Security and Medicare are kind of non-starters. So they're really talking about a really small percentage of the budget left that they'd even be willing to cut. And that means big cuts to just about everything. So what's your feedback on what their plan is versus reality?
So the GOP will never cut military funding. They will always try to increase it, as they try to decrease other care options for people, other opportunities, especially in everywhere. This is going to affect those who are impoverished, who don't have parents who can take care of them. If people have sick parents, this is going to, the whole point is to create another military, is what's going to happen. They're going to cut all this funding and give the only opportunity for, say, a young boy or girl living in Middle America or here in California, the only option that they have for a future life is going to be the military. Funding is going to go into education for that. If you go, I've seen Navy commercials constantly, and I'm above age to go. But it's going to flood everything from schools, with recruiters going into schools, which was passed during the Bush era because of the No Child Left Behind Act, which is a whole controversy on its own. I mean, really, that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to take all these people that cost them so much money and get them ready to become militant individuals who are going to work for the government, who are going to cost less to work for the government because, well, we already need people. They're just machines. They're cogs in the wheel. And they're going to send them off maybe, well, with our next topic, which we'll bring up, the propaganda wheel is already turning.
So just generally speaking, though, so that's the military side, sort of the political ramifications of, their approach is cut everything in effect. And truthfully, like I said, if you look at that Republican study group plan, if they really are serious about balancing the budget within 10 years, and they're really not going to cut military, and they are going to only make minor changes, because like it's one of those things people should know, but Medicare and Social Security raise their own line items on your paycheck. They're their own taxes. So in a way, that's like disingenuous. Whether you're going to use that. Whether you're going to leave that alone or not. It already makes most of its money, each of those programs to a certain extent. Now, Medicare obviously is a whole nother conversation because of the reforms that it needs and the reforms it's getting instead. That's a whole nother show. But in our closing minutes here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say, like, because we talked about the Biden position in these budget negotiations. If they don't agree to raise the budget ceiling, which they kind of have to, there's all kinds of talk about how tragic and catastrophic it would be. Just about every week we see an article or a release from Secretary Yellen saying something like, it'll be catastrophic, and they're talking about they can shift money back and forth through July. But politically speaking, do you think that the Republican position of holding the government hostage, air quotes, is something that's viable, or is it more theater?
It's theater, and here's why. What the GOP is saying, we want to cut everything, that's their negotiation point. They're going to go extremist on one side so that when the negotiations happen, they're already starting from here or from one side and slowly moving, hopefully more towards their side than in the middle. That's all they're doing. They're just setting up for really hard and difficult negotiations. I mean, the last time financial negotiations happened that were extremist was, I believe, during the Clinton era, where the government shut down. It might have happened during Obama too, because Democratic presidents get a lot of flack from the GOP.
Yeah. And they need to know, right? They need to know that there's going to be some pushback, because that's what history says. Well, we're going to leave it there for now and move on to our next topic. Issue 2. Over the weekend, U.S. and Canadian militaries shot down more aerial objects. And it was front and center on, any media source that you care to look at or listen to or read. It seems to have been a huge deal. But one of the things that I noticed is that what we're seeing is a lot of anti-Chinese rhetoric in those comments when people are getting interviewed about, what the United States saw and did, and what the impact is on the risk profile. There's just been a tremendous amount of hyperbole. And I'd go so far as to say that the congressional GOP has been engaged in a lot of hype about the risks. But one of the things that is being talked about, which is more serious, is a coordination of military and economic trade review and approval process. So what we're talking about is the military would step in and say, before you send this technology outsourcing to your plant in China or your subsidiary in China, it has to be reviewed not just by the Commerce Department, but by the military, and anything that could be used at all in a way that, for example, if we find parts in the balloon, it's been leaked that the balloon that was shot down and that landed in the Atlantic, they've found parts on there with English language, characters on it, basically saying, oh, even Chinese weather balloons have American stuff, and we don't want them to have it. So that language is, in a way, they're starting to say things like, in other words, they're saying the quiet part out loud, by saying we don't want to share any technology with China. So one example is that Ford Motor Company announced that they were going to open a big battery production facility in the United States, and Virginia has a Republican governor, and they said we don't want it. We don't want a Chinese manufacturing plant here, and so it's going to be built in Michigan instead. And folks are already congressional GOP Congress members are starting to say, well, that could hurt Ford in their ability to get government contracts and military contracts, because if they have Chinese batteries in there, we may not want them. And so this is, again, I think this is, I call it 3D chess, because if you're saying we're not going to take any Chinese technology, that means that this $370 billion of Inflation Reduction Act money and Infrastructure Act money on top of that, we're talking real money. We're talking, hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to be invested in the future greening of the energy supply and the economy writ large. And so Republicans, and their lobbyists and their connections to fossil fuel industry, they're seeing this as an opportunity to delay any kind of changes to the current structure. And so I guess my softball question to you is, do you think this congressional GOP hype is justified about the imposition of China in our supply chain and in our future growth and investments?
I love how this went from UFOs to, is China taking over the internet? And the answer is yes, China's doing a really great job. Leo is kind of like or people who live in China's version of Facebook or Twitter. And it is many more people use that than in the United States uses Twitter, which obviously nobody uses Twitter now, except for people who haven't realized that there's nothing good on there. There's this idea that banning TikTok because of its geolocation tracking and information systems is going to somehow leak private information from those who use it, which I can easily see, say, people who have high clearance not being allowed to use social media. I feel like most of them are already told, at least on lower ranks, be careful. And then those who are in higher up ranks are probably going to be told, do not use anything such as TikTok that comes from China, at least tech-wise. They're making a lot of money, and they're making a lot of money off Americans. And that's going to upset Americans. Of course it is, because we want to make all the money. And that's not just a GOP issue, that's an everybody issue. That they're going to Detroit, I don't think there's much. Like, I love Ford, right? Classic American car. I really hope that they can get their stock up and make a lot of money just off that and make good cars. Not that they don't now, but it's called fixed or repair daily for a reason. And so maybe some competition in the area wouldn't be terrible. Not only that, they're not going to be bringing over employees from China, I presume, because it's really hard to get a visa anyway, unless you go through the education system in the United States, which talking about the United States education system, to call it collegiate levels, I had or knew plenty of people from Hong Kong and different parts of China, which Hong Kong and China are technically two different things if you ask them. I'm not fully prepared for the politics of that one. And they spend so much money in the education systems. So if you look at any, say, Polytech, they're going to make over $150,000 potentially from a student who comes from China than a student who is local, because that's just the way it works. So they're not going to send employees though from China to take over. Like if something builds employment in Michigan, which I'm not sure if everyone's aware how like destroyed Michigan still is. Like Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water. The factories are all broken down. People squat in these homes that maybe, that are just disheveled and nobody can really rebuild. So to bring a financial situation to Michigan, I'm not actually opposed to that. And I think TikTok is destroying everyone. So and I need to get off it. It's terrible. It's addictive, and that's the point of it. And I have spent money on TikTok, and that money is not going back to the United States. But if they come and build a place over here, we have so many factories in China. If we don't allow them to build here, are they going to not allow us to build there? Because their labor is very, very inexpensive and very, very inhumane. So I'm not sure what the GOP is looking for here with this. I would have thought they would have said, oh, those are Russian, because everyone's setting up to be angry at Russia. And so that they're being like, no, it's China now. And I'm like, why China all of a sudden? Is it just the massive financial cha-ching that they're bringing in over there from the United States? And that's probably it, including entertainment, which that's always been the United States' number one moneymakers, entertainment.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd like to pick up on is what you'd said. Why? Like, why is all this energy directed against China? And like, if you just take a half step back, there were Congress members from farm states, and actually I think it was Senator Tester, if I remember correctly, who's actually from Montana. So lots of people, though, not just to put it on him, like there were like a whole wave of Republicans out there in the recent days talking about the fentanyl crisis and blaming the border for the majority of this fentanyl coming over, blaming China. And yeah, people acknowledge that there was the opioid addiction problem that came from pharmaceuticals, but that now that's a little bit less of a problem because of the costs, and it's much cheaper. But more than that, fentanyl is really being sophisticated. Organized criminals are putting fentanyl in a whole bunch of different products that aren't even, people are ODing like by accident. It's not like people are saying, I want an opioid. They're saying, I want Adderall or something, like a normal, not to say that's normal, but some relatively normal medication, but it's actually being, tainted, so to speak. And so between the farmland, they're talking about fentanyl on the border. They're talking about China purchasing farmland, how they don't like that. And I think it's only about 3% of U.S. farmland, but people are saying like, we just don't want them involved in our food chain because it's a security risk. So everything's going back to this security risk, and the hyperbole is pretty high levels of it, saying like China wants to defeat. I think the exact quote was, China is this is another serious threat from China to defeat the U.S. militarily and economically. So now we're supposed to be competitors. Our economies are very, very tightly tied together between debt and trade, commerce. But there's this posturing that is it's almost to the point where it's like it's excessively focused on hype. Like I said, when you've got real threats about unidentified objects in the sky, well, you solve that problem. Like what NORAD did was we talked about this a little bit last week, Eric and myself, how NORAD was looking for fast moving big things up high and not looking for slow moving small things down low. So they recalibrated, and then they started detecting these things that normally just went undetected. And so some of those are commercial, some of those are weather, some of those are amateur hobbyists. Some of them maybe are, I forget the new name for UFOs, but who knows? Some of them are truly unidentified. They don't know what it is. But rather than go down the rabbit hole, because there's a lot of people out there saying that this is we're getting UFOs hidden from us, I like to just say there's objects up there that used to not get scrutiny, and now they're getting a little bit more scrutiny. The only one object that was shot down that was currently attributed to China was this weather balloon, and maybe it is a provocative move, and maybe it is intended for surveillance that is sort of harmful, but that doesn't mean that we can't also continue the massive amounts of commerce that we do with them, and also be cognizant of the fact that the United States can green its economy. It can start building things again and transition towards those things like wind farms and solar farms and next generation batteries and possibly even next generation nuclear and geothermal and all these other things. We don't have to buy Chinese parts forever.
Where do you think those parts are going to come from? Where do you think all those tools are going to be manufactured? I know we have them in the United States, but what What
But
does
right now it's all China. Yeah. Right now it's all China.
and what does the government look for when they're doing a government contract? They look for a very high value of money, but also for a layman like me, but also less money than the other guy. So they're going to cut corners. And where can you cut corners from manufactured goods from China? Not that they don't have quality goods. It's just that it's almost ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like I joke around that a broken clock is right twice a day. And to a certain extent, we do need like the chips, for example. Taiwan makes the most cutting edge chips in the world that supplies both China and the U.S. It's a really strategically important thing for lots of reasons. For most reasons that you could think of, it's important for that reason. But the truth is that the country did, under this administration, did make a massive investment and commit massive amounts of funds to beginning to make cutting edge chips here back in the U.S. And in theory, we could do this again with the green energy development. But the reality of it is that what the language we're hearing from a lot of Republican Congress members right now is that let's be real. We have a lot of natural gas here. We have a lot of oil here. We don't need to move too quickly. And like I said, I think they're saying the quiet part out loud here it just seems agenda driven. So one last thing here that I think is interesting that you touched on to circle back to is that you had mentioned we're not going to have like Chinese workers coming here to staff these factories. And so if it's the case, even if it is a Chinese company or a collaboration with a Chinese company and their intellectual property, I don't know if you saw the film, and I'm sorry to hit you with left field on this, but if you've seen the film American Factory, it's a documentary. So it shows in Ohio a Chinese like glass manufacturing, I think automobile window glass manufacturing. And the top management of the company, half a dozen people max, they're from China, and the rest of the company is all American workers in Ohio and American managers who have experience in the industry. I think they might have bought an old plant or something and kind of taken over, that kind of thing. But when push comes to shove, we found that there really was a clash of the viewer of the documentary finds that there is a clash of cultures here, and it's really neat because they're kind of saying the quiet part out loud, where again where the management team in the United States goes back to China and brings some of the U.S. managers who are like the sort of the token managers. Representing the American workers, and they go to China and they realize, oh my goodness, this is kind of crazy. It's like a cult business celebration, like the worshiping, the air quotes, the actual company and the profits of the company, and how the workers are supposed to dedicate their lives to the company. And it just shows, anyway, I know I'm getting off in the weeds here, but it shows like this contradiction, this sort of clash of cultures, how they really look down on the United States workers and their work ethic, and even the managers' inability to motivate the American workers. And so I think that factory ends up closing. So this is a slightly different story, but I just wanted to mention it because it highlights that from an economics perspective, we do have interdependence, but we are very far apart in many ways here. And so I'll give you the last word. I know we just have a very short period of time left. Last word on, do we foresee that we will continue down this road, politically speaking, of division, divisive language when it comes to China as a fear-mongering tactic?
There's nothing that can be done as long as those in power within the United States fear the financial wellness of any other country in the world. And the United States is a powerhouse. We like to be number one, and anyone that isn't number one, that is number one above us in anything, we want to take down immediately, whether it be staging a water or the UFO, just call it a UFO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The weather balloon.
Weather balloon, thank you. Whether it be staging a weather balloon, whether it actually be a weather balloon that just innocuously flew in from because wind tunnels are wild in the sky. They can actually fly very easy. And was it malicious? Nobody's ever said, like, is it actually malicious? What is the data on all these random things? So the United States is going to continue to fearmonger. That's what we do. It's literally what we do, especially looking at, say, a right-wing news source while the left wing is fear-mongering about this thing. It's just what Americans like to do.
Well, right on. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you. And we'll move on to our next topic.
From the beginning of this round of bargaining, we've gone from essential to expendable, and it's very frustrating. It doesn't seem concessionary at all because it is 3 sick events that are unpaid, and you're supposed to schedule them 30 days in advance, and they're only allowed to be taken on Tuesday through Thursday. It seems to be quite the joke. We've already seen how essential we are if you have the president and Congress imposing an agreement on us. It points to the fact that it's very vital that we have plenty of members to work. They may not have enough workers, enough people to fix the damage that they have.
Our next topic is the hazardous material train derailment in Ohio. Why is this significant domestic ecological incident getting limited press coverage? So when I saw this first, it seemed like it was a catastrophe, and not to be engaged in overstating the case. But there was not a whole lot of information about it. So what is it that we're talking about for folks who don't know? I think most people know by now because it's finally starting to get some coverage. But last week, a 150-car train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, near the Pennsylvania border. There was a toxic air event. There was a plume over half a mile into the air. And actually circulating online is an aerial photo taken from a plane that was nearby. And it just shows how massive it is. It almost looks like a hurricane or a tropical storm. It was hugely significant, even from an airplane's perspective. And so 20 of those cars on that train were carrying known carcinogens. One of the specific chemicals found in 5 of those cars is known as vinyl chloride, which vaporizes into phosgene, which is a lethal chemical weapon that was used in World War I to kill thousands of people. The EPA press release said that these toxic chemicals were released into the ground and the air and the water. Thousands of residents along the border, Ohio-Pennsylvania border, were evacuated. So this is something that was interesting that I saw. Ironically, the air quality induced evacuation loosely parallels the plot of the film White Noise that was recently filmed in East Palestine. So that's kind of sad, actually, but true. So approximately 300 homes in this community have been tested with no positive results so far, as we know. But and here's the big but: thousands of animals have turned up dead over 7 miles away. Including the Ohio River, all along the Ohio River, dead fish.
In Aaron Brockovich, and everyone knows that Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water. This is a massive cover-up of a horrendous atrocity that is a manufacturing error, which I'll let you go into because I know.
Yeah. So I was going to say I got a little bit of background for folks about this. A decade ago, in around 2012, corporate lobbyists prevented the Obama administration from implementing robust safety regulations that were intended to address derailments of trains carrying hazardous material. But the final rules were narrowly focused ultimately on crude oil rather than the entire hazmat risk spectrum. A couple years later, 2014, the industry blocked the requirement being promoted by the federal government to implement an upgrade to electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, known as ECP brakes. And as the Lever reported, railroad industry lobbyists blocked the rules, and the company ignored when workers tried to bring safety risks to light. Their argument was that this will cost $500 million and to the industry. So the industry collectively determined the cost-benefit analysis indicated the safety improvements were not economically worthwhile. So a recent Media Matters article titled Study National Television Coverage of East Palestine Train Derailment Ignored Industry Culpability. That study found that just 3% of coverage included sufficient context of why incidents like this happen. And so one journalist from News Nation was arrested for disorderly conduct and criminal trespass offense while at Governor DeWine's press conference with the rail industry representative. And the reason he was arrested was because he had made arrangements to live stream some of the presentation, but not the governor. And when he started live streaming, he realized the governor was on and he turned it off. But somebody somewhere saw a live stream, saw the governor, and found this person and, wrestled him to the ground, strong-armed him, and took him out of there like he was a criminal, that it was harming society, it was harming the community, when in fact, he was scheduled to be there to do this. So that could be chalked up as a misunderstanding. But taken together, the history of the lobbying industry impacting and affecting policy outcomes, that element of it, the cost-benefit analysis being the determinative reason why we have approximately, if you look at the data, about 5 trains derail every day in the United States. Now, the way that's calculated, it could just be technically a wheel comes off the track. So it doesn't have to be a major environmental catastrophe like this. But the bottom line is it's a lot. It's thousands. It's many. It's close to 20,000 over the period that was studied. So it's happening all the time. But industry is successful. One last thing I'm going to throw it your way. The president recently, the Democratic President Biden recently intervened in the rail strike that was happening last summer. And the striking workers were saying, look, it's unsafe. We're being pushed to the maximum. We don't get sick days. We don't get any kind of breaks where we're pushed to the maximum. And the White House and whoever else they consulted with decided that the supply chain bottlenecks we were experiencing under COVID were a national priority. And when the industry lobbyists said that, hey, look, we can't give workers more benefits right now because it would disrupt our entire business model. And so the business model, we now know what it is. It's the maximum extraction of labor at the minimum headcount. Ultimately, that's it. And we could go into the weeds here, but I'm going to toss it to you. Your feedback on them. Like, I think the big question is sort of why do you think we haven't heard about it? You said, and what,
It's a massive media cover-up.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. I'd also like to point out that, speaking from an earlier topic, capping financial spending on certain aspects of American life, Obama had wanted to put in a sort of a safety committee. We have a safety committee, but he wanted to fund it further and do a whole railroad check, which I believe was the kibosh was put on that.
Yep. And
that could have saved so many lives, because with a chemical situation, that can stay in the soil for who knows how long. I'm not sure of the stability of those particular chemicals, but that's a big smorgasbord of items that, when combined, have been used in wars to kill people and to make sure that those people's children die because of deformities, cancers. The food that they eat will be there. The food that they grow will pick it up from the soil. Again, it's an atrocity. It is a horrifying atrocity. And why hasn't it been picked up? Because nobody wants to take the blame for it. When a tanker it unleashes a lot of oil in the Gulf, you don't hear about it. You'll hear about it and you'll see all those people going and wiping off seagulls and being like, look how happy he is. It's going to be a big distraction. I bet if you change over to Fox News, if they cover it at all, you're going to see, oh, look how happy, the fish are. They're not dying anymore. They're going to be just fine. It's just a huge cover up in order to save one of the biggest industries of the United States, which is the transportation industry. And perhaps it's because a lot of the Midwest really needs to use trains to get cargo from point A to point B. It is much cheaper to transport. You can't transport that in an airplane. You're setting up for a really horrible time if you do that. You can transport it with ground, and the only way to do that is via trains. Nobody wants the train crew or the railway corporate heads to have, to be seen as terrible and neglectful, despite the fact that they are neglectful and they are terrible. It reminds me of, are the trains currently national or are they privately owned? Because I feel like it's a mix of both in the United States.
I think they're private companies. Like, for example, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway purchased BNSF, I think it's called, which is one of the big three. So it's big. It's a Wall Street trust. Investment banks and the sort of the type of thing that you'd picture in a Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged movie.
I was gonna say this is literally like Reardon Steele.
Yeah.
Versus nationalization, and
Yeah.
Of course, if you are, say, a Randian follower, you're gonna believe that, oh, if you give it to the national crew, the people, it's gonna go off the rail. This literally happened in the book. Where a train went off the rail and all these horrible things were happening because it became a national issue. And then going back to the beginning when you said, I believe it was McConnell who was speaking, or somebody
McCarthy?
said, maybe McCarthy, that, why is it our issue to help other people?
Right.
The United States. This is a big reason why, if you don't take care of your workers, they're not going to put in the effort. They're not going to put in the hard work. And I've worked in the transportation industry, but it was flight, and safety is number one. If there is some issue and it's reported, which it needs to be reported, the planes aren't taking off. Even if it's something small, even if passengers are yelling at the pilots and the stewards and me and everybody else, if there's something wrong with the plane, until it can be checked out and cleared, it's not taking off, because it's such bad PR for the airline industry for that to happen. So for something horrendous like this to happen in the railway station, of course they want to put it under wraps. Of course they do, because that can be a lot of money lost. People might lose faith in that. How much money did that cost to have all of those chemicals, which take a lot to lab create and to stabilize? That's a lot of money lost. It's just an insane amount. So they want to not be seen as terrible. They don't want the public to lose faith. They don't want investors to lose faith. And they want to just wash it under the rug, because, again, why doesn't Flint have clean drinking water? Who cares about the people who are suffering, who might suffer for a generation or two? They should figure it out on their own, despite the fact that it was created by a corporation. The corporation was negligent and created a problem.
Yeah, one of the elements that you touched on there was the workers and how they want to do a good job, and they want it to be a safe operation, period. No, like, hard stop. So because of the strike that happened in the summer, we've been kind of hearing from the industry folks, like career people, for now going on 8 months or so, or maybe a little bit longer. We've been hearing there's been a lot of people saying, look, there's a problem here. They're putting profits over people, and that's like, we have to be aware. And so one example that I heard this past week from one of the employees or investigative journalists interviewing an employee said, we used to get 3 minutes to inspect each car, all four wheels on the car, but as the headcount goes down and the demand for expediency goes up, now we have 90 seconds. So they're given 90 seconds to check all four wheels for integrity per car, which is, that works out to pretty much half the time that they used to have. It's just one tiny little example, but it just goes to show. And also, one of the really key things here is that we knew, like, people have known that this is a trade-off and that there's a cost-benefit analysis kind of thing that's happening here. But again, the fact that when given the opportunity to decide which chemicals are worthy of being treated with the most carefulness, whatever that word, being as careful as possible with oil industry, with gas industry, fossil fuel industry products, and then the chemical industry, their products, no, they're not considered a risk. Yet they're going through these small towns, and we see that they made the decision to release the chemicals manually into the air after the crash because they were afraid that there would be explosions, that these cars would blow up, and the fragments would just be a horrific visual image to see that the rail cars were blowing up. This is the same cars with the same chemicals that they said weren't risky enough. So what do you think about our prospects for making some progress here, given that now finally people are starting to see these trade-offs?
Well, I also want to point out that it might have been smarter for them to unleash the gas there than to allow it to explode, because to mix up those chemicals would have created a whole world of different problems than just releasing them on their own, allowing them to dissipate. They probably did it one at a time, whichever carts were more pressurized, etc. So that actually could have been a really intelligent move. I don't know the situation, but I can see how that could potentially actually be somehow better than just letting them explode.
One of the things people were talking about was, well, what's our cancer cluster going to look like? What's the class action lawsuit going to look like? We've got the example of Treasury Secretary Buttigieg, who was out giving a speech during this period of media sort of, let's keep on the DL as long as we can. He didn't even mention it. So now the GOP Congress members are out there saying he's asleep at the switch again and ... So it's being highly politicized. It's almost like he's being targeted for something that they did to a certain extent, or their predecessors. Like I said, I know we just have a minute or so left. Any thoughts on how he's being vilified so vigorously?
When there's so many things going wrong, he's going to be vilified for something. There's no way not to. There's no way to cover every single thing every single day. That goes for any Congress member or president or anyone. Though to sweep this over, perhaps he's just planning out his words. Could be, I hope.
Yeah. Or the negative thing, he could be waiting for the marching orders from the White House to, kind of wrap their head around the side. They let the problem play out, so they knew what kind of damage control they needed to do.
This is one thing that's going to be capped, is safety regulations within the United States, especially for privatized companies. And so this is going to be something that is probably being saved as do you remember this? Because this is why we want to spend money in order to create a more safe railway system, transportation system, safety for warehouse workers, for transportation workers, for, Caltransit, for everybody. Because, that's more of a California thing, obviously. But.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there. But, deregulation is kind of one of the things that we hear an awful lot about during elections. I'm sure we're going to hear it again from candidates. And so I look forward to, we'll revisit this again in the future. All right, well, that brings us to predictions. Talvi, I know you're a guest co-host this week, but we're going to put you on the spot. What's your prediction for us this week?
I feel like I could look back through Simpsons episodes and it would come up with any better prediction than I could create. The world is so interestingly volatile right now, and the United States is really at a transition point. What that transition point is going to be, I cannot say. I do think when it comes to the GOP versus financial situations that Biden is trying to push forth, I don't know if that's going to be solved within the next few years. I can see a government shutdown happening, which is kind of sad to say. As for the UFOs, aren't they just weather balloons, really? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. That's for the conspiracy theorists to suggest. I want to know more data on what they're actually finding with that one. And I think more data is going to come out.
All right, cool. Well, I'll keep mine short. Nikki Haley formally announced that she's going to be running as a candidate for the presidential cycle in 2024. And she said some provocative things that I think are basically going to really sink her ship before it even leaves port. So one of them is she said that there should be a mandatory mental competency test for politicians over 75, which is a big dig at both President Biden and her former boss, former President Trump. She also thinks that there should be term limits for Congress. And also, according to The Guardian, she had said, and this is worst of the worst, she said that in an interview put on, but it looks like the Sons of Confederate Veterans, that states should be able to secede. And she said, quote, "I mean, the Constitution says that." And she said that the Civil War was fought over one side fighting for tradition and the other side fighting for change. And so these are very provocative things I don't think are going to be received very well. And finally, somebody out there has said that, in fact, she's wrong, that states can't secede. Supreme Court case Texas versus White. States entering the Union became part of a, quote, indissoluble relation as perpetual and as indissoluble as the union between the original states. There is no place for reconsideration or revocation except through revolution or through consent of the states. So this is going to be really make her look in a pretty negative light. My prediction is that her candidacy is going to be relegated to a spoiler. So with that in mind, that's about all the time we have this week. Till next time, stay informed and stay engaged.